All right, so here we go. My name is Lisa Hayden. I'm Outreach Director at New England Forestry Foundation, and I'm hosting today in my role as Administrative Agent for the Woodlands Partnership of Northwest Massachusetts. And this is a 21-town collaboration working together on forest conservation, support for rural municipalities, and natural resource-based livelihoods. And so this is the first of 3 workshops this spring. It's to be followed by an estate planning forum in April and a woods walk in early May. And this will be an opportunity to visit the land that we'll be hearing about today from our landowner guest, John Sears, out in Hawley, Mass. And so here's a quick overview of the plan for the day. We'll be hearing from DCR Service Foresters, Allison Wright Hunter and Mike Downey, and also from Josh Rapp, conservation scientist at Mass Audubon, about some climate planning options. And so our event planning team today includes stewardship folks from Mass Audubon, including Olivia Barksdale and Nicole Marcotte. And they would like to thank all the Mass Audubon CR landowners in attendance today. And also a shout out to NEF CR landowners on behalf of Easement Stewardship Director Andrew Bentley, who helped get out invitations. I also want to thank Kate Conlin, coordinator for the Woodlands Partnership, for her planning support and hosting the Zoom today. And also, as we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I am joining you from Sturbridge, on unceded land of the Nipmuc people, the ancestral people of this place who were dispossessed of their land. And in my work to support landowners in making decisions about the future of their land, I want to learn more about how we can address past injustices of how land was taken from Indigenous peoples. And I do have a number of thank yous. We want to thank Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs for the grant that's making this series possible. We also have many partners who have been working together with the Commonwealth Conservation and Recreation Department on piloting climate smart forestry practices in Northwest Massachusetts. And soon these will be becoming more available statewide. And of course, as we work together on climate change, we know that one of the big priorities is keeping the forests that we have and avoiding conversion of those lands to development. And so hopefully, as we support landowners to make good decisions, we'll be supporting that goal as well. Okay, so this webinar is designed to complement a series of booklets for woodland owners called Caring for Your Land. And these were produced by DCR and partners, including some writing support from Northern Woodlands Magazine. And a good one to pick up first is there on the left. It's called The Starting Point, and that's usually a good place to start at the beginning, right? So I would suggest that one that provides some big picture questions about your overall objectives for your property. And today we're going to be talking mostly about themes from the Setting Goals booklet. And this is focused on current stewardship options for wooded land. And this can include both passive approaches and more active management to meet various objectives that you may have. And just to note that this series was produced specifically for private landowners or family woodland owners, that audience of folks who do own the majority of our forests in New England. However, some of these themes about stewardship planning and weighing trade-offs are also applicable to municipalities that own forests and may be seeking to build consensus within the community about what steps to take on those pieces of land, or also land trusts who are caring for wooded parcels. And I think we have perhaps folks from both of those groups with us today too. There are 2 other booklets in this series focused on climate change, adapting to changing conditions, and managing for forest carbon. And so those are both ways to help contribute to natural climate solutions. Okay, so identifying what you care most about can help you focus on what to do first. And of course, understanding your top goal or priority is an important step towards accessing a lot of opportunities that are becoming available for funding support, both from state, federal, and other programs. And so we have a quote here from Walt Disney, let's stop talking and start doing, which is a great perspective, but also important to try to take a step back sometimes and think and plan a little bit. And that can hopefully help us to do better once we start moving forward with action. So I want to just start off by asking a few questions for you all, and please feel free to grab a blank sheet of paper and a pen or pencil and jot down your answers to these questions. Also, you can feel free, if you feel strongly about one or two of them, to enter your answers into the chat if you would like to share, but don't feel obligated to share. So first off, what question do you most want to have answered today at this event? Why did you come? Next, how do you spend time on your land? Number 3, do you have a favorite place on your property? And where is it and why do you love it? And the 4th question, what do you want your land to look like in 5 years? And how about in 30 years? And I'll just leave these up for a minute here or so for you to think a little bit more about them and maybe begin jotting down some answers. Okay, so I'm not going to take too long here because we do have a lot of speakers to get to, but please hold on to these notes and hopefully you can refer back to them and continue answering them as you move forward in your planning process. And so before we move on today to introduce our speakers, I am going to walk through some of the most common interest areas for private family woodland owners. And these are descriptions that are also outlined in that goals booklet. They're shared by large groups of woodland owners. And the booklet also includes stories of actual Massachusetts landowners who are taking steps to realize some of these goals on their property. And I just want to mention too that, I'm not trying to suggest these are cut and dried categories at all. Of course, every landowner is an individual, bringing your own life experiences and perspectives to your land. And some people may want to pursue more than one of these goals, and many of them are compatible. However, as we'll touch on later, there are sometimes some trade-offs among different priorities that you need to kind of navigate through. And if your land is large enough, you may be able to pursue different goals on different parts of your property based on the characteristics or conditions of the site. So, maybe there's a sledding hill or a good pond for fishing. Maybe there's a vernal pool in one section of the forest, or ephemeral wildflowers that you enjoy seeing every spring. Or maybe there's, a big old pine grove where you like to have picnics. And maybe other stands are overrun with bittersweet vines or other invasives that maybe are actually strangling the tree trunks. So these are all kind of questions to think about and perhaps get professional advice to help you figure out how to address. And goals, of course, will also vary based on your own interests, values, and personal and family financial needs. Okay, so let's walk through some of these interest areas. First, we have the outdoor recreationist. And here you see people hiking on trails on their land. Perhaps they've built bridges to get over brooks or streams. Folks in this group really have fun on their land. They may be creating trails, maintaining them. Maybe they like to hunt or fish, or perhaps they share their land with neighbors or friends that enjoy the same activities. Then we have the working woodlands owner. And for these folks, whether they're planning long-term timber production or harvesting firewood, or maybe even practicing agroforestry or renting out campsites to weekend visitors, for these folks, land is a renewable resource and a potential source of income. And of course, working with a forester to make a plan for your land is a great way to both read the landscape and understand what's happening in the woods now, and also planning for the future on the right times to harvest timber, and to be sure you're doing it in a sustainable way where there will be, a forest doing well for the future. Next, we have the wildlife steward. And if you're in this group, you probably enjoy watching birds maybe through binoculars, or setting up a trail camera and being able to see what kinds of animals are moving through the forest at different times, perhaps on wildlife corridors. You're probably also interested in taking action to improve existing habitat conditions, and perhaps maybe making some changes so that it might be attracting other species if they have the right food or the right places to nest. And a wildlife biologist might be able to help advise on how to best do that. And so the last group outlined in the booklet is what we're calling nature's ally. And these folks are interested in their woods' contributions to larger natural systems that are under stress from rapid change. You may be interested in protecting water quality, or learning more about how forests sequester and store carbon. And you probably want to understand how to help your woods adapt to stressors such as warmer temperatures, extreme weather events, and more invasive pests that we're seeing. And I want to just touch on another opportunity that's really important for folks that are interested in long-term stewardship of their land, and that is thinking about property taxes and kind of the financial burden of that ownership. The current use law provides a lower tax rate for undeveloped land and recognizes the public benefit of having those open spaces. Typically, folks can see a 75% reduction on their property taxes, and there's 3 different categories. If you own more than 10 acres, Chapter 61 for property in active forest management, and if you own at least 5 acres, categories for agriculture and open space. And October 1st is the date to circle on your calendar if you're interested in getting involved in that program, if you're not already. And it is important to understand all the ramifications of it, and foresters can be a really helpful guide on understanding the intricacies of Chapter 61. And then the last thing I want to touch on before moving on in the program is just thinking about conservation options for those who have not, already taken that step. Your land could be part of natural climate solutions, and the decisions you make there could be helping to support our larger efforts to address this crisis. And some of the questions to think about here are, if you love your land as it is now, thinking for the long term, who's going to own it after you? And in this case, having those family conversations is really important. Understanding, maybe the goals and priorities of your children as they grow. Are folks interested in living on the land someday? And being proactive about estate planning and how your land fits into, your financial goals. Are there habitats or natural features that land trusts might be interested in for conservation? You do need to find a partner if you're interested in getting into conservation, who's going to monitor that land for the long term. And a new and important area is learning about opportunities to perhaps support Indigenous groups to gain access to lands for cultural use. Okay. And so that wraps up the intro part. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our landowner guest today, John Sears from Hawley. And John has a really interesting background. He's a past executive director of an organization, the Roosevelt Trust. Interesting historical records there, and has also taught at some of our universities in Massachusetts in the past. And he's going to talk today about his experience caring for family land in Hawley. And I'll turn it over to John.
Good afternoon. My family moved to Hawley in 1781 when it was probably a bit of the last wilderness in Massachusetts. And we farmed for 2 generations. It's not great farming land. And my great-grandfather went to college and became a teacher, and that became the sort of family profession from then on. And we became usually summer people. In 1904, my great-grandfather and grandfather bought 100 acres of land and a farmhouse next to the old estate, the old farm that was still being farmed by my great-grandfather's younger brother. Could you show the first slide there?
Yes, and I'm trying to get it to advance, which it's not
Okay.
doing for some reason.
Oh, so
I'm going to stop share and I'll reshare in a second. So
yeah, okay. So that property became our home, our the home that we all loved the most wherever we happened to be living otherwise. And in 1984, my father divided the land into 3 parcels, one for each of his 3 sons. My older brothers, Richard and David, and I, and my older brother got the house, which you'll see in a moment, and the land around that house. David and I got forest land. In 1987, my 2 brothers and I put most of our land under Chapter 61, which Lisa had mentioned earlier, and that program reduces the taxes on that undeveloped land. And that's been a great boon to us. The program requires that the property owner hire a forester to make up a 10-year forest management plan. We're now in our 4th 10-year management plan, in the middle of it. And the forester divides the property into three parcels, or that's the way, 3 zones, which are determined by the makeup of the forest in those areas. So one zone has, heavily forested with white pine, another with hardwoods. And then he or she recommends the treatment of each of those zones, when cutting should be done, whether it should be, very selective cutting or just forest stand improvement cutting, or some more substantial harvest. We've had 3 harvests of timber in that nearly 40-year period, and we're about to do another one next winter. So our goals for the property have been to keep it in the family. You could say, you can understand how rooted we are in this place. And you can see how beautiful it is from that photograph. That's the old farmhouse there that's now owned by my 3 nieces. My 2 brothers are both deceased. And I now share my brother David's land. I now own jointly with my 3 nieces. In 1991, my brother David built a lean-to, really a wooden tent, an A-frame on his property. And then in 1991, my first wife and I built a small house. You could go to the next slide. That's the house we built, expanded. We expanded it, or my second wife and I expanded it into a 3-bedroom house. Originally, it was just 18 by 20. In 2011, the Franklin Land Trust approached my brother Richard and I about putting our land under a conservation restriction, which we negotiated over some time with them. We finally finalized it in 2014. And what that does is it means that no structures can be built on that part of the land, which is most of our land and virtually all of my brother David's land, which we own jointly. That whole 35 acres is preserved forever. With it can't be built on. We reserve the right to cut timber, to make maple syrup, any other educational activities or agricultural activities, to cut trails, walking trails. So that CR gets passed on to future generations, and also to if some of the land should ever be sold out of the family, which we hope will never happen, that CR would be passed on to the new landowner. So the land is virtually preserved forever, undeveloped, all that part of the land. We reserve some strips of land where houses could be built in the future if some of our descendants wanted to do that. Now, recently, we started an interesting project. We got a grant from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is a federal agency, to do what's called a shelter wood cut on the joint land that I own with my three nieces. And I was inspired to do this by Guyette Farm, which is in Plainfield, and it's owned by Franklin Land Trust, and they had done a pretty extensive shelter wood cut there, which means that you do what you usually don't do when you manage a forest. You clear virtually everything in an area, leave a few seed trees, and then you do it for biodiversity. Because what the forests in New England generally are mature forests, and that means that there's not a lot of diversity of habitat. And by doing a virtual clear cut, you encourage the growth of brush and bushes that wildlife like ruffed grouse desire, and which these forests, like what you're looking at in this slide, are not places where you'd find those kinds of animals. So Pat Conlon, Kate Conlon's husband, who works for Mass Wildlife, came and advised us about how to develop this plan. We walked through the forest several times. The forest, this is what you're looking at in this slide, is forest, the jointly owned forest. And over to the right, there's an area which it's not heavily timbered with white pine, which you see here. And we came up with a sort of different plan from Guyette Farm. What we're doing is we discovered these about 6 oak trees, which are producing oak seedlings, but the seedlings are getting they're getting crowded out by ferns and black birch, which grows faster. And so they're not maturing into trees. So the goal of our project is to encourage these oak seedlings to grow. And oak is one of the species that's predicted to be resistant to climate change. So it's a very important species in our area, and it's also a keystone species. That means it provides a lot of places for food for other animals to eat, places for other animals to nest, and so forth. So what we're doing is we're cutting like 1/3 of an acre or half an acre around each of those oak trees. We're suppressing the ferns with chemicals. We're cutting the brush and smaller trees, and just leaving them in piles in order to protect the seedlings against browsing by deer. Deer love to browse oak, unfortunately. Fortunately for them, but not for us. And so we're trying to hopefully mitigate that loss of seedlings to the deer. Whether how well this works, I don't know. I see it as an experimental project, and it'll be wonderful to watch it. It's something that we'll all enjoy. The family will enjoy watching how this works out. So we enjoy our land a lot. If what you're looking at in this slide at the top of that area, there used to be 2 sugar maples. There's now 1 very old sugar maple, field maple. And that's our picnic place, and it has a beautiful view. If you remember the first slide looking out at the mountains, you can see that from there. We've camped on that spot. There are hiking trails back of that into the woods, which we enjoy using. So I think I'll stop there. That's you can show the last slide if you want, which is what we happen to be doing currently.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's stopping me from advancing
Okay.
again. Sorry.
Okay, it just shows some sap buckets. I'm making maple syrup right now. I have a
Yeah,
little
great.
backyard evaporator. So I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John, for sharing that. I got a note that my internet connection was unstable, so hopefully I'll stay on here. But
I think you froze.
but thanks for sharing.
So Allison, were you up next?
I'm not sure. I could go, or Josh might have been on the agenda to go as well. So Josh, are you there? I think it might be good to have Josh go first because
Okay.
he's going to talk about some things that I can elaborate on a little bit if he's there.
Yeah, I thought I was at the end, but I thought there was also a time for landowners to
Yeah, sure.
ask
So,
questions.
the way the webinar is set up is if you want to speak and ask your question, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Or you can put a question in the chat for John or for anyone here. You can also ask questions of John at the end as well, if there's no questions right now.
Am I back?
Yes.
You're
Okay.
back. There is one question in the
Yeah, we
chat.
have a question.
What's the question in the chat?
Yeah, I can't.
How does the Chapter 61 forest land work with the new clear corridors that you are also doing? Well, it fits in with our management plan. I mean, one part of when you do a management plan, we have a stewardship management plan, and you can include other things besides timber harvesting in it. You can say, I want these particular trees preserved, or I want to improve the biodiversity. So we're hoping that this project with the oak trees, the shelter wood cut, will create habitat for species that we wouldn't otherwise attract. Certain birds may like that, those sort of micro habitats. They won't be extensive. They're, a third to a half acre. This is the slide it shows some of our hardwoods. We have quite a few sugar maples, and we have someone in town who does most of the sugaring on the property, but this is something I do. I like to do it when my grandkids are around. So Chapter 61, there are activities like this, or like the project to regenerate the oak trees. Those are allowed within the Chapter 61 management plan.
Right. So, John, I was going to ask you if you can hear me again, right? Okay,
Yep.
okay, thanks. I was going to ask you if you could talk a little bit about how the family made decisions together. And I know some of it was done, when the ownership was in different hands, or by your brother, I believe. But were there family discussions, and how did you kind of tackle that as a group together? Or are you still doing that?
Well, to some extent, we're still doing that. I mean, I just revised my estate plan, and I'm not going to go into that now because I know you have a session coming up on estate plans, but that was probably the most complicated discussion we've had. But you know, when Richard and I, David put our land under Chapter 61, it just seemed we didn't have disagreements about it. Fortunately, we just, you know, thought it made sense in many ways, both from a financial point of view and from an ecological point of view, and from yeah, and so that wasn't a complicated decision. The conservation restriction was a little more challenging because you're putting the property in a state where it can't be built on. So we discussed that with our children. And my brother had 3 daughters, my nieces, and I have 2 sons, and so we talked to them about it. How do they feel about it? How much land should we preserve where future building could be done? And we preserved a strip of land along the middle road and Pudding Hollow Road, which run through the property, where future building could be built. So those are not part of the CR, those pieces of land. So if someone in the future wanted to build another house, they could do so.
Great. All right, thank you.
We have a question about good templates for municipalities that might be interested in having a forest stewardship plan. Is that something we should answer later on or talk about now?
I think it might be addressed in some of the talks coming up, but let's make a note to circle back to that if we're not addressing it. And just also to mention that we can stay on until 1:30 if needed, although kind of the formal part of the webinar is scheduled to go to 1:15, and we'll try to wrap up our talks by then. But if folks want to stay on to have questions answered, we can do that. Okay, so I think we'll turn next to Allison Wright Hunter, a service forester with DCR, and I'll let Allison share her screen and go ahead with her talk.
Sure, just give me 1 second here. Are you seeing my screen?
Not yet.
No? Okay, hold on. Isn't that fun? Give me just 1 second here. Oh, I see. Let me try this. Okay, now are you seeing my screen?
There we go. Yep.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us. So I'm a DCR service forester, and we have a program of 10 service foresters across the state who work for you, the landowners. We are there for you. You can pick up the phone or email us at any time with your forestry questions. We administer the Chapter 61 program. So when consulting foresters write plans, they come to us and we review them. We also have a more regulatory hat when it comes to commercial forest harvesting under a cutting plan. And that's called Chapter 132, the Forest Cutting Practices Act. So we're really here to work for you, and we're available. We can walk your woods with you, help you think about your woods. We can talk to you about what we're seeing and how that might further your goals or your objectives. And so I think what a really fun thing to do would be, to start getting to know your woodlot or your land is to make your own map. And so you could start by getting a tax map or just drawing the boundaries that the shape of your land. And you could start by putting your house there, if your house is on the land, any roads, any trails that you know of. And those are sort of your access points, right? And then maybe start drawing your streams and wetlands, vernal pools. And then after that, now you have major landmarks on your property. It could be a big rock or a boulder, those sorts of things. Now you can start thinking about, where do I see the wildlife? Are there a lot of deer? Where are they? Are there vernal pools? Are there areas where there's invasive species I need to treat? Are there trees that don't look very healthy? Are they dying? And those would be areas maybe you are concerned about. And what this map will do for you is that it's going to help you communicate with the forester or other resource professional as you continue your journey, planning some forest management potentially. And so setting goals, management goals are big picture items, right? And so we at DCR will provide you with a very long list, and it's not exhaustive, but I would challenge you to find yet another goal. Might be possible. And so management goals aren't actions. They're starting to think about actions. You're starting to put together ideas about what you want to do on your property and what you want to achieve. You know, do you want to see more birds? Do you want to mitigate climate change? Do you want a more resilient forest? Do you want to maintain aesthetics? Do you want to make some money? Maybe you want to do all of those things, right? So it's not, you know, no one goal fits by itself, right? You might have multiple goals, and there may be ways for you to achieve those. And so we encourage you to, of course, start talking with foresters, and you can start by, of course, calling your service forest. So since today we're going to start talking a little bit about climate forestry, and I've been asked to talk about some ideas or concepts and the idea of trade-offs. But where I need to start right now is this idea of managing for forest carbon. And we're already talking about that some, right? And so the most important thing we can do to mitigate climate change is to keep forest as forest. Mr. Sears, John Sears, just talked about that. And in perpetuity would be the best, of course, as we put more and more pressure on the land as human beings. Another great strategy and sort of fun idea is to plant trees. Plant trees where you didn't have trees before, or plant trees just after a harvest. Another idea that people like is this idea of having a reserve. And John just mentioned that on his property, there's areas that maybe they don't manage. And that's just fine under Chapter 61. There are some rules around that. Percentages of acres. You can have up to 50% of your acres in non-productive status. And so that's more of teasing out some details, but there are many options and opportunities for you to think about forest carbon and getting, you know, achieving your goals. So on the spectrum, those concepts, those ideas were very light-handed. But as we move forward in thinking about resilience of forest and how can we better create a more resilient forest, a forest that can handle climate change and the stuff that's going to be thrown at us in the future. And a lot of that's something that we really don't know yet, right? We don't really understand what's coming. But what we do know is how to manage forests. And we do know how to, as John was saying, regenerate our forests. And so what we want to do is use forestry to get this, to create this future forest that's more resilient. And we're calling that improved forest management. And that kind of management is science-based. We're using science that is researched and supported by the scientists, climate scientists that are out there working on this. So the ideas behind getting to the resilient forest are multifold. And you can see here that there's many different things you can do to create that future forest that's more resilient. And really what we're getting at is more of a messy forest. It's going to be sort of look more like a jungle. Like maybe you can't even see through it. Maybe you're having a hard time walking through it at times. And so that's building these layers, forest layers, right from the bottom, you know, young trees and shrubs, right through the middle layer, getting lots of, you know, saplings and small pole trees, and then having, you know, a diverse canopy over, you know, overstory with many different species. So when something comes, like I'll use something like hemlock woolly adelgid came, right? And So we need to figure out how to help hemlock continue to grow, but we would also like to figure out how to have a species in our forest that could function like hemlock. I don't know that we're there yet, but those are the sort of things that people are working on. So thinking about trade-offs, right? So a trade-off is something, I could use this example. So when we think about logging and forest management, we sort of think like, wow, that's going to create a mess in my forest. So that's a trade-off, right? So we want to do some forest management, but we have to understand that it is going to be messy. Most likely it won't look as messy into the future. I usually say about 5 years for a good logging job, but we want to do that work, and we're going to accept some trade-offs. Another one that we talk about most recently a lot about is this idea of managing for carbon, is that a trade-off is managing for resilience, a trade-off for forest carbon, right? Well, maybe not. Maybe on your woodlot, we could manage for both. Maybe we could manage using passive management concepts in one area, and then another area manage for resilience. And I think Josh will touch on that later as well, where we're starting to evaluate the forest and find those areas that are more vulnerable and at risk. And that's where we want to do our forest management. But really, when we start doing this work, we might have to forego some of our income. And that's important to forest landowners, right? There's a lot of us who don't have a lot of income. We do look to our forest sort of as a bank account, or stocks in the stock exchange. And so what we're thinking is that, well, maybe we need to invest in some of these passive areas. I'm going to passively manage this. I'm going to forego my income over there in order to store more carbon. And I'm going to invest a little bit more in my best management practices after a logging job. That could cost you some money, but we might be able to help you with that. So this is getting outside of the goals idea a little bit, right? So what we have right now is very exciting at DCR. The Forest Climate Solutions Initiative has allocated some money for us. For when you have a forest cutting plan, we can help you with some of those trade-offs. So here's a list. We don't have time to talk a lot about it today, but Michael Downey and myself are available to talk more about it. But this is what it could look like on your property, all right? So this idea of an incentive practice 1 in 5 over to the left by the road, we would have some funding to help you with planning your roads layout. Where are they? This is money for you to pay a forester when you file a cutting plan. Number 5 practice is for those elevated best management practices, climate smart best management practices. Over in the lower right-hand corner is treating invasive species, right? So we have funding to help you pay for that. In the upper right-hand corner, we have money to help you find and designate those passively managed areas that are called legacy areas. All right, so that's funding for people, for landowners who have a forest stewardship climate plan. And then the practice number 3 right in the middle is funding to help you pay for marking of trees for climate smart management practices. And again, you would need a forest stewardship climate plan for that funding. So it gets a little messy, right? So that here's the idea of being, I'm a nature's ally, or who am I right here? I'm everybody, I'll tell you that. I have land as well, and I recognize all of these attributes or these goals that are here. And I could pick one any given day and then change my mind tomorrow. But I do recognize where the trade-offs are. Here's the cool thing. We also have funding right now for you to talk to a forester when you get a management plan. It's called technical assistance funding. It's a very exciting time right now for us to be able to help you get better work done. And I encourage you to look for those win-win situations rather than being really worried about trade-offs. Let's work to mitigate those trade-offs and find situations that really work for you so you can get some work done in your woods if that's what you would like to do. So your goals may change over time. I will tell you my goals for my land. I've changed my mind 3-4 times in 15 years. You can amend or change your forest management plan so you're not stuck into one mindset over any 10-year period. And we're here to help you think through those goals. So that's what I have for you all today. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison. And so then next, we're going to have Mike Downey speak. Mike is a stewardship coordinator and also service forester for DCR. So if you want to take it away, Mike.
Thanks very much, Lisa. I just want to say really thanks to John. I loved hearing his family story, and it actually kind of made me reflect a little bit on a family story I'd like to share with you today, which is a story about my family's dairy farm. It was my uncle's dairy farm, and kind of reflecting on John's family story. I kind of, maybe it's the weather outside, maybe it's seed starting season, but I was thinking about really, where, that influence of growing up around that and around dairy and around farming and forestry really kind of set the stage really for what I do and why I do what I do. And, unfortunately that dairy farm got developed. And, when I think about John's story, some of the things that Allison brought up, as well as Lisa, about, is there, at that time, I remember I was young, I was probably 8, but I remember those really difficult conversations around the farm table about what's going to happen to the farm and who's going to own it, and all those things that I think many of us are, who work with landowners, we have those conversations with you all. And, for my family, it was, it was really difficult. And I still reflect on, did we have enough information and knowledge to make the right decision in that specific instance? And that's kind of where we are today, is really about knowledge of information to help you guys as landowners, as woodland owners, make better decisions. So Lisa spoke about it. Allison talked about it from her perspective as being a landowner, but the reality is that we all hold multiple objectives simultaneously. Most of where I have my information about what drives you in terms of owning woodland is really comes from the National Woodland Owners Survey that is done. And it's been around for decades, and it really provides us a great foundation of information to better understand you and what your concerns are, as well as what drives you for owning land. And really what comes out of this survey is fairly simple. It's that what drives ownership and why folks own woods is not about how much timber they want to cut or don't want to cut. It's really about those amenity values, beauty and scenery and privacy. And then clearly these other values like wildlife habitat play a really critical role, as well as water protection. So in terms of addressing, you have the owner survey that talks about why you own the land or reasons why you own land. There's also concerns that we all have. And one of the larger concerns that come out of the research is, from landowners, is really this concern about climate. And so not only do you hold multiple objectives simultaneously, there's also a number of concerns that we all face as not only landowners, but also the folks like myself and others that are working very hard to provide programming and information and knowledge so that you have the information to address these concerns. And in some cases, as Allison mentioned, there's a lot of financial support around these concerns that you have. So, you know, here in Massachusetts, we're a little bit unique. As if you're new to Massachusetts, you may not recognize that, but Massachusetts is somewhat unique. So we do have a you know, well over half of us that own forest land have a great concern or a concern about climate. When you get outside of Massachusetts, that concern goes down a little bit, but it's still a fairly large concern. So, you know, these insights that we get from the National Woodland Owner Survey around reasons for owning land as well as the concerns, you know, really that is the foundation of how we deliver our programming to you, and in terms of the information and knowledge as well that we're trying to present. So Allison hinted at it. We heard a little bit from, you know, we heard a little bit earlier today about really how to start these conversations. And I'll be honest with you, the best foresters are good listeners. That's when I'm looking for a forester, I want somebody who's listening, not somebody who wants to tell me stuff, because I can get that inside my own family, right? So good foresters are good listeners. The 5 magic words here, tell me about your land, that's really the best way for us as professionals, as foresters, natural resource professionals, to engage you all in a two-way dialogue, because that's inherently allows that dialogue, that two-way dialogue allows me to see the land through your eyes, which is the most important part. So, you know, that two-way dialogue, which helps, these 5 magic words help start that, you know, that's the critical aspect of the planning process and really the critical piece of goal setting. So, for example, when I'm working with, you know, a forester, if I'm a landowner working with a forester to develop a forest stewardship plan, this dialogue is critical to understand, you know, where I'm coming from as a landowner. So, you know, the stewardship program came about in 1990, and it was born really out of the National Woodland Owner Survey information that I've presented earlier, which is that why do people own woods? And as we saw earlier, it's not about board feet and timber. It's about those amenity values. It's about habitat. It's about water, soil, these things that historically were not typically addressed in forest management planning processes with landowners. So the stewardship plan and the stewardship planning process recognized that way back when in 1990, and really continues to support your journey in exploring all the wonderful attributes that you have on your forest. So one part, John spoke about it earlier, about his planning process and how he got a forest management plan and got into chapter 61, and that wonderful story that we heard earlier. You know, really that plan is there to help you. As I talked earlier about my story, is it's really about better informed decisions. It's there to help you provide all the details about the wonderful land that you have, and then in that two-way dialogue, create a wonderful planning document that lays it out so those decisions that you're making or you're comfortable with and are aligned with your goals and objectives. So the other and critical part, and Allison spoke to it earlier, it's really that planning process, that stewardship planning process. It's about connecting you, the landowner, with a forester. The research is pretty clear around that an effective management plan, and I think John spoke to this as well, is that it does create increasing engagement on your land. It creates that connection that inherently is there because you own it. However, when you have that document that articulates exactly what next steps are, you're more likely to implement. And that's what we're here to support. And so in terms of programming that supports not only the planning process, we also have programs that address specific attributes or reasons why you own the land, or in some cases concerns. Like John expressed concerns about not being able to maintain or stimulate oak reproduction on portions of his land due to a variety of reasons. Forestry can help with that, and there's a lot of techniques that can help with that, as John mentioned. So with regard to habitat, we recognize wildlife habitat is an important reason for owning your land. We have a Foresters for the Birds program that's there primarily to provide an assessment, to get you baseline documentation about what's going on your land. And then through that assessment, based upon your goals, what are my next steps to help these birds that I've identified as being important, or canaries in the tunnel, as some would say, right? Because some of these birds are indicative of whether or not the forest is in a great place or not. And how do we transition it in a way that's useful for not only your purposes, but also for the habitat for the birds, for their increasingly difficult situation that they're facing. So Allison mentioned it beautifully in terms of, you know, the program around that we've built along with our friends at Mass Audubon and others regarding climate forestry and how we think about the forest and where it is now, and how do we present it in a way so it's resilient. And Allison has done a great job presenting those trade-offs that we all recognize. So we have a lot of programming around climate forestry right now, from training and some of the things that Allison mentioned around support around forest operations, and we also have technical assistance as well as a specific climate stewardship plan. Also, what was mentioned earlier today is about, you know, from John, we heard it from John about the planning, estate planning. There's a component within the Working Forest Initiative to help you with that. Difficult conversations, as John mentioned, and they are difficult. I've had them. I'm still recovering from those conversations, to be completely honest with you. So, and that was, you know, done in 2014. So, my therapist says I'll eventually get to that point where I'll be comfortable again. But I'll say, you know, these conversations are difficult. However, we have some great folks that can help with that. We have a whole program dedicated to that conversation and help. How to start those conversations, getting you in touch with the attorneys and such. So UMass has been a critical partner in delivering that program since the beginning of the Working Forest Initiative in 2008. So I can't say enough about Paul Cantanzaro and others in delivering that content. So you can't deliver a program like the Working Forest Initiative by yourself. So we've had a ton of help. These are the partners. And to be honest with you, without this great team and collaboration, we wouldn't be where we are with the Working Forest Initiative. So thank you for them. Allison mentioned that's who we are. I am part of that. I am a service forester, just as Allison is. We hold, you know, our program goes back to the beginnings of the Office of the State Forester and when it was established. We've always been there for folks across Massachusetts since 1904, providing them the technical assistance and in terms of proper management and other programming. And we'll hopefully still be here for a long, long time. That's me. I'm Mike. Feel free to reach out. So happy I got to hear John's story. I hope to hear some other stories today. So thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it. And so we have one more speaker on the formal program today, and then hopefully we'll have time to take questions if folks want to be entering them into the chat. But Josh Rapp, a conservation scientist at Mass Audubon, is going to share a little bit about some of the climate planning resources available.
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute.
No worries. We can see your screen, so it's
Thanks, Lisa. She said I'm a senior forest ecologist at Mass Audubon. I've been working with the both with Lisa as well as Allison and Mike for a few years now. I wanted to kind of tie a couple of things together that other folks said about this whole planning process. Obviously, today we're focused primarily on setting goals for your woodland. And then in whatever planning process you go through, there's an assessment phase of understanding what's in your forest, and a forester can do that in a detailed and quantitative way. As both Mike and Allison mentioned, thinking about climate is becoming more and more important for thinking about how our woodlands are going to be in the future, understanding the impacts of climate change, vulnerabilities of our forests to that changing climate. John talked about encouraging oaks to get established, because those are a species that should do well with the changing climate to maintain the forest there. And then sometimes you need to assess your goals and objectives in light of what you learn about your forest. And then the next step is to identify actions to implement those actions, and then watch it over time. So as John said, that it's sort of an experiment. Anytime you do something in the woods, what's going to happen? How is that forest going to develop afterwards? And are there other things you need to do to keep moving towards your goals? And so the stewardship program, as Mike mentioned, is one way that the DCR helps you do that. We're involved with that, particularly around the climate plan, but also around through the Foresters for the Birds program with the bird plan. And we can, so I'm here today focusing on the climate plans and how you can get one of those climate plans. I saw there was a question in the chat earlier about examples of plans for, but in this case, municipalities, but in general, and those are available. So we've worked with some municipalities to get forest stewardship climate plans, and happy to share and point you to what those look like in the future. So I can follow up more in the question and answer period about that. But today I wanted to talk just a bit about this webinar is being hosted by the Woodlands Partnership of Northwest Massachusetts. And so I wanted to focus just a little bit. I know there's folks on the webinar today from across the state, but if you're in the Woodlands Partnership region, which is the northwest corner of the state, shown on the map here, there's a particular sort of add-on incentive program. Allison and Mike mentioned that DCR has a program to help both private and municipal landowners to implement practices. Well, there's some additional incentive funds in the Woodland Partnership region for additional practices. And to be eligible for this program, landowner must have a forest stewardship climate plan or a habitat management plan that we often call a bird plan. Those are both types of forest stewardship plans. This cost share program is designed, there's cost share available both to design the projects, so to take the recommendations in your forest stewardship plan and really design how those are going to be implemented on the ground, and for the implementation of those practices. And there's also technical assistance also comes with the program, along with the option to have your forest monitored by Mass Audubon ecologists. And my colleague at Mass Audubon, Andrew Randazzo, is the contact for that. And so you're welcome to reach out to him to learn more. The practices that we're focused on in this program are enhancing the adaptive capacity of forests. And so this is any number of types of harvests or thinnings or work in the woods that helps you increase the capacity of your forest to respond to climate change. We also have cost share available for planting trees, especially if those are trees that are expected to do well under climate change, and to address issues related to regeneration, like removing invasive species, and if you're planting trees, protecting those trees from deer browse through a variety of methods, including fencing and tree tubes. This figure here shows kind of the flow chart of how it works. You fill out an initial interest form, and if that QR code would take you to a form that you fill out, tell us a little bit about your property and what kind of planning you've done already. Then we'll have we'll give you a call, talk about your project, potentially set up a site visit, and coordinate with your forester. After initial approval, there's this sort of application, larger, full application phase that really describes what you will be doing on the ground as part of the project. That's done with your forester, and there's funding available to cover your forester's time in doing that. Then you get the work done, and if you opt into the monitoring, we monitor both before the work is done and then again afterwards. And then the payment, your forester or contractor is paid directly, so that you don't have to worry about that payment, unless with the caveat that in some cases the funding may not cover the full cost of the work, depending on what the work is, in which case there might be something that you would have to pay as well. But you would know that before having to sign off on any approvals. So I think with that, we're a little bit over time, we said, and I want to make sure there's time for questions.
Sounds great. Thank you, Josh. I have a couple more slides to share.
There we go.
Let's see here. Okay, can you see that? Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you so much to all of our speakers today. We really appreciate it. As I said, we can stick around for a few minutes here. I just wanted to share that these are some key links on some of the programs and resources that were mentioned. The masswoods.org through UMass Extension is a wonderful kind of first stop for woodland owners to learn all about your options on all these different kind of scenarios of thinking about conservation, needing to do estate planning, Chapter 61, connecting with a forester. It's a great kind of clearinghouse of information if you're just getting started. And also there's very detailed guides on Chapter 61 that go into all the intricacies of that program and all the different categories. If you're thinking about getting a stewardship plan, a 10-year plan for your woods by working with a forester, we have links for that through DCR and other partners. And also another group we've worked a lot with is the Northern Institute for Applied Climate Science. They have an adaptation workbook that's really helpful for thinking through climate planning and identifying vulnerabilities to climate impacts on a particular site. And we can share these resources and follow up to everyone. And it's not letting me advance again. Anyway, let me see here. Okay, well, I just have couple more slides, and for some reason, my bandwidth, I guess, is not cooperating today. But basically, I just wanted to open it up for questions, and we do have a couple of other events, as I mentioned, coming up. The dates of which are, let's see, maybe I can look at it and then
I can-
share. Okay, yeah,
April-
April.
April 25th from 5 to 7 at Franklin Land Trust in person.
And then May 4th, I believe, is the Woods Walk. And maybe now I've gotten it to come up. Okay. So yes, so we're really excited. And thanks again to John for offering to host a Woods Walk on his land out in Hawley. And we'll be sharing some more details about these events. We're asking folks to register in advance because we will be somewhat limited on space for both of these. But hope that folks can join and learn some more about goal planning. Okay, so I would like to open it up to any other questions that folks have. I think that Kate can unmute folks,
Yeah,
but
I'm gonna
okay,
unmute you
great.
and that.
So
Ask-
raise your hand, or you can enter it in the chat and we'll attempt to make sure we get to everyone.
Hello, I live in Wayland, which is in eastern Massachusetts. And I want to just get your take on this. The MBTA communities requirements are driving us all crazy here. And we're trying to come into compliance. I have conservation restricted land. I want to preserve it. And we have still reasonable amount of forested land here in Wayland. But the MBTA communities requirements seem to run totally contrary to everything you people are talking about. So I think like the state is schizophrenic, and I'd like to understand how this is all supposed to work together. If you have to zone 50 acres for dense housing, and there's no public transportation. We happen to be what's called an adjacent community. We have no public transportation, and we have to zone for 750 new units. So we have limited roadways. We have no transportation. It puts more cars on the road. It requires cut down of trees in areas. And there's this push for climate resilience. I don't understand how the whole program works from the state's perspective. And I was hoping one of you might have some understanding and or be able to push back at the state to get sense put into all of these programs.
Yeah, so I know a lot of the work that we're talking about here relates to conservation initiatives and the Forest's climate solutions work that the Healy administration is putting forward. But there are a lot of other departments, I'm sure, that are addressing climate change in different ways, such as Department of Transportation, and dealing with the need for affordable housing. So I'm not up to speed exactly on the question you're posing, but I don't know if Mike or Allison have any other comments they want to share.
And this isn't an affordable housing program. This is just more housing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, if you want to share your question, we can try to figure out who to refer that to and share some other resources if we can follow up on that.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying is it's a combination of all of you people who are on the conservation side versus all of the other people who are on the urbanization side, talking to each other and making sense of what it is that we really want in the state. Because if you have 61B land, which we do have, we want to preserve it. But that's not helpful if they want to have more housing.
Right.
So-
Well, I know
so
that
it
there's
just
state
makes no
priorities
sense.
to be sure there is affordable housing for all the people who need it too. So I
But
know
this
it's
isn't
definitely a
affordable
balance.
housing that is they're talking about. They're talking about market rate housing.
Okay.
And Ned, I'll
think-
just, I can just weigh in with a couple of things. One is that you're in control of that. It's your community. So there's a variety of planning documents that have been done at your community level, open space and recreation plans, and a variety of other things. And, I would support you in being vocal about what your community wants. And, you know, Lisa mentioned it at the very beginning, where we have really a lot of fortune here in the Eastern United States as well as Massachusetts, where land is owned by individuals. And again, you know, if somebody told me in forestry school that the forest is more about people than it is about trees, I may have not gone into forestry, to be completely honest with you. So it is about how we make decisions. It is about how we have information and knowledge and to make those decisions. So, because at an individual level, we know that land is being lost. You know, Mass Audubon puts out some wonderful publications and others about that. So yeah, it is about what your community wants.
Actually, it's not. I wish it were.
Okay.
We're being told by the state, it's not up to you.
Right, that's true. And I think part of the problem is that these state mandates and other mandates, sometimes municipal mandates, are one size fits all. You know, there's no flexibility or no understanding that their local conditions may be different, particularly from between the eastern part of the state and the western part of the state, for example. Or I know in Northampton, my wife owns a house in Northampton, and they have this drive to do infill, you know, to increase the density of housing, but that's causing problems in neighborhoods where you're trying to squeeze in too much housing in too small a space. It's not appropriate for the neighborhood. So there has to be more flexibility and more, let's look at each case, you know, there have to be some, it can't just be uniform.
Yeah, and I know, you know, at the community level, of course, advanced planning with an open space plan or, you know, that kind of effort is also important, and trying to identify areas that should be set aside from development early on, also with areas that are appropriate for growth. But again, I'm not familiar with the specifics of the situation you're mentioning in that, so.
My suggestion is that you all become familiar with the MBTA community's requirements. There's a whole website at how on the housing, the state housing web, and you should become familiar, because we do have all of the things you're talking about. We have open space plans, we have recreation plans, we have individual conservation restrictions that the town has purchased and that many of the homeowners have placed on it. I'm unfortunately the chair of the planning board trying to deal with this right now, and it's impossible.
Yeah.
And so it is important for you folks who are in the government to talk to your compatriots and explain that you're talking apples and oranges to each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. I would guess the thinking is to try to, you know, reduce maybe emissions from people traveling by having more people living closer to MBTA
Right,
stops.
but many of us
yeah.
don't. We have no public transportation in our town, nor do many of the other communities who are being pulled into this.
Okay, interesting. All right, well, thank you for sharing that. We will try to follow up with some other resources that we can uncover. Appreciate it. It looks like Beth has her hand up. Beth Gershman, are you able to unmute or? Kate, you don't have to do anything to.
No, I'm asking her to unmute.
Okay.
There's also a question in the chat about terminology. We used a lot of different terminology around plans. Alan asked about differences between forest management plan, forest stewardship climate plan, climate stewardship plan, stewardship management plan, which is a very good question. A forest management plan is a very general term for any type of plan that is about how you use your forest, essentially. The forest stewardship program is a specific program that supports forest stewardship plans, both forest stewardship climate plans, or just climate plan, or bird plan, are types of stewardship plans. So I hope that helps. If the other two there that are climate stewardship plan, stewardship management plan, I think those are just amalgamations of other words and don't have specific meaning.
I'd like to just add that you can actually have a combination plan. So you could have a stewardship plan that is in chapter 61, that is a climate steward, I'm going to try and get it right, forest stewardship climate plan, and also a bird habitat management plan. So you really could have it all if you would like that. I guess the title of your plan will get awfully confusing and none of us will get it right, but it would all be on paper so we would know what you wanted. But the titling would be difficult. Combo plan.
Right. Great. Thank you. So it looks like Beth can't unmute, but
She
I
was
don't know.
looking for the link for the landowner
Okay.
incentives, which
Okay.
I will send out that link and anything else mentioned in a follow-up email for everyone here.
Okay. And are there any other questions, either in the chat or if folks want to speak up?
Josh, if you wanted to speak briefly about the municipal, the ways municipalities could structure their own stewardship plans.
Sure. So municipalities are eligible for cost share to get forest stewardship plans, or for town-owned forest land. Mike runs that program, so he knows more about this than I do. But Mass Audubon has worked with a few different municipalities in getting climate plans for their lands, mostly in the Woodland Partnership region, and I'd be happy to share with Kate links to some of those plans, because those are in most cases public documents that are on the municipal websites, so you can get a sense of it. One thing I will say is that whoever your forester is will put their own stamp on it. Every forester has their own style of writing, and so plans do differ a bit from plan to plan, but they all have a certain set of requirements that are met in those, and so all have similar information.
Great. Thank you. And it looks like Alan, hopefully that addressed your question.
Yes, thanks. If
Okay.
you could still hear me.
Okay. Yes.
It's
Thanks.
just somebody else was going to speak and you're asking them to unmute. I don't think they have the power to unmute.
Oh,
I have
okay.
to give them the power, unfortunately. But anyone who wants
Now
that,
I've got the power and I have nothing to say. What a waste.
anyone else would like to speak, I can help you.
Yeah. Well, I'm not seeing any other comments in the chat or hands up other than folks who we've talked with. So I think we'll wrap it up and give folks a few more minutes. But thank you so much to all of our speakers and everyone for joining today. And we will follow up with an email sharing links to resources to folks who registered. And we did record, so we can share a copy of the recording too once that's ready. So thanks again so much, everyone, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.